Hanif, thank you so much for giving me some time to talk to you today about Shattered.
Yeah.
It's a book that is so involving for the reader and, of course, charts a recovery. And so, in fact, my first question really is to ask, how are you today? Because there's a progress that we follow in the book up to a certain point, but obviously time has passed since then.
The book goes up to, I think it goes up to around Christmas time. And we're now in October. So things in my life have certainly improved since I came out of hospital. That was a really dark and unpleasant period. And it's mostly covered by the book Shattered and the blogs that I wrote with Isabella at the beginning in Rome, and then wrote later with my son Carlo in London, and then revised for the book. Things I've looked up a bit, and I've written a lot of other blogs, I think, that may go into a second volume. And I'm certainly more cheerful since I got out of the medical industry or hospital situation, yeah.
The time that you spent in hospital, and in fact the time recovering back in the UK as well, we'll come back to that in a way, because I think it's so brilliant for the reader to understand how difficult that period was and how dark. But what's really interesting is that very quickly your desire to write was so obvious. And in fact, I think the first blog comes, I mean, it's just a few days after the actual accident, isn't it?
Yeah.
You say in the book, I cannot be persuaded out of my desire to write. It is at the centre of my being. Can you tell me a little bit about how you set about writing when you obviously physically you were so restricted at that time?
Well, I had this terrible accident. I was in incredibly bad shape in the ICU in Rome, and then in the rehab. But while I was in the ICU and then transferred to a normal ward, I decided that I would write a blog. But of course, I can't use my hands. I had to dictate it to Isabella, who would sit on the end of the bed while I yelled at her, typing it into her phone,
Yeah.
which is, as you can imagine, quite a laborious process, particularly in a second language. And then I decided that I would put the blog on Substack, which is a writer's platform, really good writer's platform, which meant that I could publish it immediately. That was a real boon, because you say, and then it's out there. So I started doing this, and I started doing this every day, even though, as I say, I was in a pretty bad state. But I really had a very strong desire to do it, because it meant that I was alive and that I was a person, that I was capable of working and doing something that was real, as opposed to just being a body that was in pretty bad shape, broken, really, utterly destroyed. But I could still speak. I was a talking vegetable, in fact, as my wife described me. But it meant a lot to me. And after the first few blogs, Carlo put them up on Twitter as well. And they started getting a huge response. And loads of people started replying and sending notes to me. And then people started writing about me in the American newspapers and the British press all over and so on. So it started to take off. That was fantastically uplifting for me, being in a bad state, lying for hours in a hospital room with not much to do, incapable of doing anything except to feel sorry for myself. So it really lifted me up to have this sort of instant audience.
That response on Twitter was immediate and incredible to watch. Do you have any sense of why they were so popular and why people, sort of were so engaged in reading those blogs?
The blogs were written not in retrospect really, but from within the experience. I was in the trench, as it were, as the terrible things were happening to me. So I guess that's what was unusual about it. And the fact that I was already quite well known as a writer who'd had this tragic thing happened to him and was describing it day by day as it continued, as I began to continue my rehab, as I started to do my exercises, started to stand up, started to move my fingers and hands and so on. People got very interested in it, and they started to write really long replies. And I realized there are a lot of people out there much sicker than me. They were in a terrible state, and they would write thousands of words every day describing their experiences. So I'd become a magnet, like Jesus, really, for the unfortunate. But it really connected me to the world. It was really important because it's pretty miserable being in hospital, eating terrible food, unable to move, not even sitting up, just lying in bed for hours. And it was pretty grim and depressing. So it really cheered me up. So we carried on doing the blogs as I started to move about a bit. As I went into the rehab in Rome, started to stand up and have proper physiotherapy and so on. But the audience continued to rise. We got more and more readers. So after a while, Carla thought we should do this as a book.
You've spoken in the book a little bit about how, and just then, as about how writing was a really important way for you to respond, I suppose, to the trauma. So the trauma of the accident and your recovery, but also your early life. You grew up in Bromley. I actually grew up in Orpington, right next to Bromley. So
Good God.
It's a place I know very well.
Yeah.
But you've spoken a bit about how the racism that you experienced in Bromley at that period was something that obviously had a huge impact on you, and the desire to get out of there and to write, to take control of that narrative took you to the Royal Court. You were working as an usher at the Royal Court.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about the time there? Because this is a time with great writers like Beckett and Bond, Churchill, Hampton, and you seem to be very connected to them in that building.
I went to the Royal Court probably when I was in my late teens, early 20s. They were very welcoming to me there. I worked as an usher, and I read all the, they give you a pile of plays to write reports on. I worked backstage, and I hung about there for years. And it was a wonderfully stimulating place with wonderful actors, and all the writers you described, Carol Churchill, Bond, Beckett, etc., etc. So that really was my education, which was to be with people who wrote stuff for a living. And I thought, this is the life, this is where I want to be. I want to be like these people, except that I was unusual, I guess, because I was mixed race. And there wasn't much of that around it in those days. Even the Royal Court, which was a fairly left or liberal organisation, was pretty white, apart from the great writer Mustafa Matura, who was around, and also Wari Soyinka had worked there. So it was a great opportunity for me to be around interesting people.
At the same time, or sort of around that time, you also met Salman Rushdie, who's been a constant friend of yours, and you talk very sort of movingly about the support that he gave you during this difficult time. I've been lucky enough to speak to him on a few occasions, and I spoke to him with the publication of Knife about his own sort of experiences of near death and recovery. Tell me a little bit about your friendship, because it's clear that you've been a great support to each other through the years. Well,
I met him first probably in around 1982, and he just exploded on the scene in the UK with this incredibly world-opening masterpiece, Midnight's Children. And it really blew the scene apart because it brought in Marquez, it brought in Gunter Grass, it brought in Indian myths and stories and so on. It was a magnificent opening up of the world of British writing to the 80s, which was a really good time for British fiction. And he was so smart and so funny and so clever, and he was Indian. And he brought a new dimension to British writing in the 80s, and it became world writing. And it opened the doors to people like me. And I thought when I met Salman, he was so remarkable. I thought, fucking hell, you've really got to up your game here, mate. This guy is so smart and he writes at such a high level. It's got to be completely different after him. And he was so well connected. And you'd go around his house and there were people like Angela Carter there and all the other 80s writers, Jeanette Winterson and Martin Amis and all the other writers. It was a really great scene that he sort of got going. He was hugely important, I think, has been in British writing since then.
Mm. You mentioned that during your recovery, he wrote to you frequently, almost every day, to provide, I suppose, support and his own experience of recovery as well from something that was so physically shattering.
Well, he was in a pretty bad state after what happened to him that summer. But he knew a lot about physio and recovery and so on, and he did pretty well. And he's out and about and writing and has kind of semi-recovered from what happened to him. Mm. So he was a great example to me, and he always cheered me up, and sent me texts and so on. It was great just to hear from him. But I heard from a lot of people during my period in the hospital. I got a lot of kindness and support from many, many people, even from people I barely knew.
Was that a surprise? Because I think Salman says in Knife that, of course, when something like this happens to you, you get a real indication of how other people think of you because of the kind of support that you get, and that's quite a humbling thing. And you're quite honest to sort of say that you've been amazed by the number of people who've been supportive of you and the way in which they've been supportive, the warmth that comes with it.
Yeah, hundreds of people wrote to me at the beginning, and people still come and visit me every day. People I know a bit, or I've had a drink with in a pub 5 years ago, or an actor who was in a play of mine 10 years ago writes to me and says, can I come and see you, etc., etc. So, and that's really cheered me up. I like to be visited. I hate to be on my own now. I get very depressed and lonesome sitting around on my own. I can't play with my phone, or I can't do anything very much with the computer. I can read the newspapers and stuff. So I don't have much distraction, so I really like it if people come and see me. And of course, when something like this happens to you, you really get a sense of how kind people want to be. They'll come to your house and cook a meal for you and then feed it to you. And then they'll do it the next day as well, because I can't cook, I can't feed myself. I need a constant rota of people coming to take care of me. And people are prepared to do that. And normally you wouldn't notice that. It's beautiful.
Does it make you think that in a way you must have done something right in your life up until that point for people to have that kind of urge? Because of course people don't have to do that, and they might not do that, I suppose, if they didn't regard you with warmth and love.
Yeah, you wonder what you've done in your previous years to make people so affectionate and kind. You must have been sweeter than you might have thought. Yeah, exactly. But it's been amazing, the response of people in that sense, and what they will do for you and how far they will go to find you in particular hospitals and so on, and how they'll continue to come back every day and look after you and do your shopping for you, or wash you, brush your hair. Very intimate stuff that you wouldn't find other people doing for you normally.
There is an amazing intimacy actually to the experiences you had in the hospital, of course, where you require medical staff to do everything for you.
Yeah.
And you do talk about that loneliness, that fear of being left alone, and you talk about this sort of Edgar Allan Poe aspect of feeling like you're entombed in your own body because you're not able to move and have that control. Was that, I suppose, the most difficult part of the recovery, those sort of early days where you sort of felt very isolated in your own body?
Well, I still feel isolated in my own body. When I wake up in the morning, I still expect to put my feet on the floor, get up, and go up the street to Gales and do normal stuff. And then I have to get used to the fact, again, every day, that I am this other person now. So it strikes you all the time, because I've been, I'm 70 years old. I'm used to walking about and doing normal stuff, and I still want to do normal stuff. So it's hard all the time to get used to the fact you become this other person for other people and for yourself.
Even in that really difficult period, there's an amazing humour. You're talking to other patients in this hospital who all have similar injuries, but have all had very different things happen to them. And often you're pointing out the absurdity of somebody falling out of bed and breaking their neck and being, paralysed as a result, somebody tripping over a rake in their garden and similar things.
Yeah.
There is this sort of question, isn't there, for everybody there in the hospital, which is like, why has this happened to me?
Yeah. Funny enough, I was thinking about that last night. I was thinking about Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and all those early black and white films, which are really about people having accidents.
Yeah.
They just trip over shit, or they fall down the stairs and so on. And I thought about that a lot when I was in Stanmore and I was on the ward of accidents, where everybody had had those kind of accidents. That you live your life in this kind of oblivion. That you're going to walk down the street, then you're going to walk down another street, then you're going to get on the bus. But at any moment, some tragedy could befall you. You could step out into the street and get hit by a truck. I mean, there were people in Stanmore on the ward who'd been run over, a lot of people. And there were people who, obviously, motorbikes and bikes and so on, had terrible accidents. So those early films remind you of what you, in a way, you try and forget, which is your vulnerability, your fragility, and that stuff happens to you over which you can have no agency whatsoever, which is really what happened to me. It was, if I'd been sitting on the bed and I'd fainted, I guess I'd have just, fallen into a pillow, and I wouldn't be here today talking to you, having written this book.
If there, I suppose, because there's no real profitable answer to the question like, why has this happened to me? Because there is no reason to it. Have you found that there are any lessons that you have learned through this process? Is it as simple as gratitude for what has already happened and what can still happen?
Well, just be really careful when you're going downstairs. That's my advice. And also the bathrooms are really dangerous places. I mean, it's hell on earth in the bathroom. A lot of people have fallen on their asses and on their heads in the bathroom and so on. That the world is much more dangerous than you might like to think it is. But you asked me, have I learned any lessons? Well, really about compassion and about kindness. And a friend of mine saying, if you're, he said to me, I said to him, why are you doing all this? And he said, if you're not helping other people, what are you doing with your life? And I thought that was a very deep thing to say, nice thing to say, important thing to say, that how gratifying it is to help other people, how important it is to do that, and how people do actually do that in their lives as well.
Can I ask about your creativity? You spoke about how, of course, you've had to find a new way of writing. And I wondered whether the drive, as you said, that you felt almost immediately in the hospital or on recovery to create, to write, to communicate, has resulted perhaps in an even greater creative drive than you had before. You mentioned how you don't write tons of words when you were writing by hand, every day, whereas now there's the possibility to almost do more because you think first and then speak, and it gets written down by Carlo. So how has it affected your creative output?
Well, I'm doing much more. I do 1,000 words a week. We've done half of another book, me and Carlo, and we're doing, with my other son Sasha, we're doing a movie, trying to do a movie based on Shattered. But when I get up in the morning, it's really important for me to work. that I want to do that every day. And I do other stuff in the afternoon, like doing interviews or teaching or whatever. So I may be a vegetable, but I'm a full-time working vegetable. I'm contributing to the health of the nation through my work. I want to work because I don't want to be just a body. I mean, most people who have accidents like mine, they never work again. You know, if you're a bus driver or you're a ski instructor, or even if you're a teacher, it'd be very difficult for you to carry on doing your work. So I have to take advantage of my good luck and the fact that I can continue to work every day and publish books and continue my life as I did before.
I mentioned just before we started filming that I'm off to see The Buddha of Suburbia, the RSC production of your earlier work, this evening. And I know that you went to visit the other day to see how things were going on as they mount that production again.
Yeah.
What is it like seeing that story, which of course is based on your own early life, now that you are the age that you are and in the position that you are? What is it like sort of seeing that on stage?
I was a bit embarrassed at first. I thought, what have I done here? You know, there's my mum, there's my dad, you know, there's even me, I guess. I thought, what have I done, put us on stage and taken the piss? But in fact, it's a really great show. People enjoy it. It's very funny, it's very lively, it's very truthful. There's great music in it. And the audience really seem to enjoy it. And it's a comedy. I never thought of the Buddha of Suburbia as a comedy. I thought of it as a serious book with funny stuff in it, I guess. But she's done it as a comedy, and it works as a comedy. But it's also a kind of truthful picture of Britain in the 70s. I mean, racism isn't particularly funny, but the lives of the characters are amusing. And it's true to the feeling, I think, of the time.
As you say, there's a sort of version of yourself up on that stage, and without wanting to be sort of too pat a question, I wonder whether you don't strike me as the kind of person who hasn't gone through life making the most of every experience. In fact, you share some in Shattered, which are perfect examples of that. But I wonder if you were able to speak to the young Hanif back in Bromley in that period, is there any advice you would give him as he sort of steps out of that and into life in London?
Well, I had a lot of breaks. I mean, I guess I was probably talented, but I had a lot of breaks from people in the theatre, and then in movies doing My Beautiful Laundrette, and then at Faber doing The Buddha and so on. A lot of encouragement and breaks. It wasn't as difficult for me to become a successful writer as I originally thought it might be. You know, you work for years and years to try and break through. And a lot of people helped me, actually. So I guess you could say that I might be an example to other younger writers of people who might make it as writers as well. But it's tough, but it's not impossible to do that in this country. And there are now around a lot of incredible writers of colour and from different backgrounds. The other night I was at the Buddha of Suburbia, and Zadie Smith was there, and she came over to me, gave me a cuddle. She's a very sweet, beautiful person, really. And she's a great example of what talent there is in this country.
Well, Hanif, as I said, the collection of those blogs and those thoughts in Shattered are so immediately involving for the reader as they go through the process with you. I can only thank you for giving me a bit of time to talk to you about the book today. We look forward to part 2.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, me and Carlo are writing another version called Still Shattered. So you can look forward to more misery in the future coming out from the Kureishi household.
If that isn't a sales pitch, I don't know what is.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Cheers.